Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. It was just past 9 on a Thursday evening, and I had settled into my usual corner of the couch, wrapped in my soft gray blanket with a cup of chamomile tea cooling in my hands. The house was unusually quiet. My husband, Mark, had left earlier for a last-minute work dinner, and our son had finally moved out just a month prior. The silence was still something I was adjusting to. Some nights it felt peaceful, other nights it echoed too much. The TV hummed in the background, playing one of those old reruns I didn't really watch but left on just to avoid the weight of the quiet. I was halfway through my tea when my phone vibrated across the coffee table. The screen lit up with a name I barely recognized, Elliot Palmer. I squinted at it. The name rang a faint bell. I was sure he worked with Mark, maybe someone I'd seen once or twice at a company barbecue or a holiday event. I hesitated for a moment, then picked up. "Hello?" I answered, cautious but curious. There was a pause, and then a breathy, confused voice came through. "Oh, Claire?" "Yes," I said slowly. "Oh, shoot, I meant to call Mark. Sorry, wrong number. This is Elliot Palmer. From his office. I must have clicked the wrong contact." I laughed softly. "No problem, it happens." But he didn't hang up right away. Instead, there was a small chuckle on the other end, then a pause that stretched just a second longer than it should have. "You know," he said, his tone shifting slightly, "I've heard your voice before, but never like this. You sound calm, comforting. I can see why Mark always talks about how grounded you are." That took me by surprise. I leaned back into the couch, smiling, though I wasn't sure why. "He says that?" "Elliot Palmer. Hey, Claire. I hope this isn't inappropriate. Just wanted to say I really enjoyed our accidental conversation the other night." I stared at the message, heart beating faster than I wanted to admit. It wasn't suggestive. Wasn't even that personal. But it was unexpected. I hesitated, then typed a short reply. It was nice. I didn't expect to enjoy it as much as I did. The dots appeared quickly. "Elliot Palmer, you have a calm way of listening. It's rare." That word again, calm. I reread his message twice, then locked my phone and stood up to make tea. But the moment stayed with me, tugging at some quiet corner of my chest. Over the next week, we exchanged a few more messages. Not every day, and never late at night. Always polite. Always restrained. He asked about books I liked. I asked how long he'd worked with Mark. We discovered we both loved old jazz, especially Chet Baker. I sent him a photo of a weathered record I'd found in our attic. He replied with a shot of his worn leather chair, a tumbler of bourbon balanced on the armrest. And I didn't tell Mark. Not because I was doing something wrong, I told myself, but because it would only make things complicated. Elliot was just someone who noticed me, and that felt good. One evening, while Mark was away at a conference, Elliot called again, this time intentionally. He said, his voice low and unhurried. "Is this a bad time?" "No," I said, curling my legs up on the couch again. "Actually, it's a perfect time." We didn't talk about anything monumental. He told me about his childhood home in Maine, how it always smelled like pine and wood smoke. I shared a story about how Mark and I had almost missed our wedding because of a flat tire. We laughed. And then, somewhere between stories and quiet pauses, he asked softly, "Do you ever feel unseen?" My breath caught, not because the question was intrusive, but because it hit too close. I closed my eyes, pressing the phone tighter to my ear. "Sometimes," I said. "More often lately." "Me too," he said. "And I don't know why, but talking to you, it feels like I'm not invisible for once." Neither of us said anything for a long time after that. And that silence, full, charged, but peaceful, said more than words could. The following morning, I found myself lingering by the kitchen window, staring at the dew on the gardenias outside. The world looked the same. Cars humming down the street, the neighbor walking her yappy little dog, but I felt different. Like I was quietly carrying something inside me no one else could see. Mark was already out of the house. He'd left early for back-to-back meetings, barely kissing my cheek goodbye. I wasn't upset. I'd grown used to his rushed mornings, but there was a hollow sort of ache in the routine. I sat at the breakfast table, phone in hand, staring at Elliot's last message from the night before. I didn't reply right away. I wasn't sure how I felt. Or rather, I wasn't sure how I should feel. By midday, I'd gone through the motions of laundry and grocery runs, even tried catching up on a novel I'd started months ago. But my thoughts kept circling back to that voice, that question, that strange feeling of being seen, heard, without having to explain myself. And then, just as I was folding towels, my phone rang again. It was Elliot. "Hi," I said, my voice quiet but warm. "I wasn't sure if I should call," he said. "But I wanted to hear your voice again." There was a beat of silence. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," he continued. "About feeling unseen. I know that feeling too well. You give, and after a while, people just stop noticing." I didn't mean to say too much. I murmured, suddenly self-conscious. "No, Claire, you said just enough. It's rare to hear someone speak honestly." I leaned against the edge of the bed, phone pressed close. "I think I've forgotten what that feels like, speaking honestly." "Then maybe we remind each other," he said gently. We stayed on the phone for nearly an hour. The conversation drifted from small things, favorite meals, old movies, to deeper, more personal reflections. I told him how I used to paint before life got in the way. He told me about a story he started writing once, years ago, but never finished. There was something about the way he spoke, unhurried, sincere, that made me feel safe enough to share things I hadn't said aloud in years. And then he said something that took my breath away. "I've met your husband's version of you, through stories, jokes, holiday party anecdotes. But last night I met you, and I liked that person more." My heart beat a little faster. "You hardly know me." "Then let me." There was no flirtation in his tone, just a quiet sincerity that made me feel like I was standing at the edge of something unfamiliar but strangely warm. That evening, I set the table for one, as I often did, and heated leftovers. Mark texted he'd be late again. I nodded at the screen as if he were in the room, and continued eating in silence. Later that night, I went to my desk and pulled out my old sketchpad. The edges were curled from age, the pages smudged. I hadn't drawn in over a decade, but my fingers moved instinctively as I began sketching the armrest of a leather chair, a half-full glass of bourbon. I shaded carefully, paying attention to the way the light would hit the glass, the texture of the leather. When I finished, I took a picture and sent it to Elliot without a caption. He replied within minutes. "Elliot Palmer, you remembered." I could feel his smile through the message, and I smiled too. The next few days blurred together like watercolors bleeding into one another. Mark was gone more than he was home, and when he was distracted, stressed, always with one eye on his laptop. I didn't blame him. Life had a way of piling on responsibilities, but I started to notice how little of myself I shared with him anymore. Not because I didn't want to, but because he no longer asked. Meanwhile, Elliot continued to message. Sometimes it was a song he thought I'd like, other times a photo of something small, a rainy street, a crumpled note, the view from his office window. They weren't romantic gestures. They were invitations. A way of saying, I see you. Do you see me too? One evening, he called again. I feel like I'm intruding on something, he said gently. On a life I don't belong in. You're not, I said too quickly. I don't want to complicate things for you, Claire. I want to keep talking, to know more about you. I didn't answer right away. I looked around the room, at the vase of fading tulips, the stack of unread books, the framed photo of our family from years ago. We looked happy then, and maybe we were. But something had shifted in the years since. Maybe, I said slowly, we're both just tired of feeling invisible. There was a pause. And then softly, he said, then let's not be invisible to each other. That night, I didn't sleep easily. My mind was tangled with thoughts, with feelings I hadn't invited but couldn't ignore. This wasn't about romance, not really. It was about connection. The kind that sneaks up on you when you're not looking. The kind you didn't realize you were starving for until someone offers it to you. In the early hours of the morning, I sat at the kitchen table, sketchpad open, drawing the lines of a face I only knew in pieces. Not from memory, but from imagination. Kind eyes, thoughtful lines, quiet strength. As the sun rose, the room slowly filled with a warm orange glow, and I realized I'd drawn a version of Elliot I hadn't yet seen. But maybe someday I would. The days that followed felt both ordinary and extraordinary, like walking through a familiar home but noticing details for the first time. The chipped paint on the hallway molding, the uneven creak of the third stair, the quiet way the light shifts across the living room floor as evening approaches. Mark was still busy, always busy. He spoke about meetings, deadlines, and travel plans, but rarely asked about my day anymore. I didn't hold it against him. Life had simply reshaped us into parallel lives under the same roof. We weren't unhappy. We just weren't seen. Elliot and I didn't speak every day, but when we did, the conversations were deep, unrushed. I found myself looking forward to his messages, to the calm cadence of his voice, to the way he asked about the small things. My garden, what I was painting, what memory had surprised me lately. One afternoon, he sent a voice note instead of a text. I was sitting on the back porch, barefoot, a glass of iced tea in hand, the warmth of the sun soaking through my cotton dress. Claire, he said, his voice low and almost reverent, I know this may sound strange, but there's something sacred about the way you describe your world. You notice things most people don't. It makes me slow down and see more too. I just wanted to say thank you. I listened to it 3 times, not because I didn't believe him, but because I wanted to hold on to how it made me feel. That evening, after Mark fell asleep in his office chair again, I picked up the phone and called Elliot. You always say the right things, I told him softly when he answered. I don't try to, he replied. But I don't want to say nothing when something deserves to be said. We were quiet for a moment. I could hear faint jazz music on his end, the soft clink of ice in a glass. Do you ever think, I asked, that we were supposed to meet, even by accident? He took a slow breath. All the time. I felt it then, that pull. Not toward romance or scandal, but toward truth. Toward someone who met me exactly where I was and didn't ask me to be anything else. Would you ever want to meet? I asked before I could stop myself. There was a pause. Yes, he said, but only if it's what you really want. No pressure. No expectations. just two people sharing the same quiet space. It took another 2 weeks before I found the courage. Mark had a weekend conference out of state, and I was left alone with a free Saturday and a restless heart. I dressed simply, cream sweater, dark jeans, a soft scarf that brought out the green in my eyes. I didn't put on perfume. I didn't need to be anyone but myself. We met at a small cafe just outside town. It had ivy crawling up the brick walls and uneven wooden tables that wobbled when you leaned too hard. I spotted him before he saw me. He looked the same as in the photos he'd sent. Tall, quiet presence, salt and pepper beard neatly trimmed, eyes kind but heavy with thought. When he turned and saw me, his smile wasn't wide, but it was real. It reached all the way to the corners of his eyes. "Hi, Claire," he said as I approached, standing to greet me with a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Hi, Elliot." We sat across from each other, and for a while we didn't speak. The silence was rich, not awkward. There was comfort in simply being. He ordered black coffee. I ordered tea. We talked about the little things at first: traffic, the weather, the cafe's odd choice of background music. But soon the conversation drifted, as it always did, to the spaces inside us that rarely saw daylight. I used to think I was done growing, I told him, fingers lightly tracing the rim of my cup. That at this stage in life, things just settle. "They don't," he said quietly. "They shift, sometimes so slowly we don't notice. But they never stop moving. I think I forgot what it felt like to be moved." He looked at me, and I saw in his eyes the reflection of my own longing, not for something scandalous, but for something deeply true. After an hour, we stepped outside. The sky had softened to pale lavender, and the air carried that early spring crispness that hinted at change. We stood near my car, reluctant to part. He didn't touch me, didn't lean in, but he did look at me like he understood every part I hadn't spoken aloud. "I'm glad we met," he said. "So am I." As I turned to go, he added gently, "You don't owe me anything, Claire. I'm just grateful you let me see you." That night, I lay awake in bed long after Mark returned. He was tired, half asleep before his head hit the pillow. I watched the ceiling in the dark, Elliot's words echoing in my mind. "You don't owe me anything." But I owed myself something, didn't I? Permission to feel, to explore what had quietly unraveled within me over these weeks. It wasn't about leaving my marriage. It wasn't about beginning a new one. It was about remembering who I was before I started disappearing into the spaces between everyone else's needs. And I wasn't ready to go back to being unseen. Not now. Not ever again. The next morning arrived with a kind of stillness that felt unfamiliar. The world outside went on as usual. Birds calling from the neighbor's tree, the soft hum of traffic in the distance. But inside me, something had settled. Not as in finished, but more like a puzzle piece clicking into place. A quiet knowing, a return to myself I hadn't expected. Mark was already gone, off to an early client meeting. I found his coffee mug still sitting near the sink, a little ring of cold liquid in the bottom. I stood there, staring at it, trying to recall the last time we'd shared a morning, really shared one, where the conversation flowed, where the silences didn't feel like barriers but bridges. I didn't feel angry, not resentful, not bitter, just aware. I poured the mug out and started my own pot of coffee, slower than usual, savoring the sound of the drip, the scent curling through the air. I sat at the kitchen table, sunlight falling across my bare arms, and I sent Elliot a message. "Thank you for seeing me when I didn't realize I was fading." He responded within minutes. "You were never fading, Claire. You were just waiting for someone to remind you of your light." Later that afternoon, I returned to my sketch pad. Not for distraction this time, but out of desire. There was a new energy in me, subtle but steady, and I wanted to capture it. I drew hands, not holding, just near each other. One resting gently on a table, the other paused mid-motion, fingers curled as if caught between thought and touch. There was tension in the space between them. Not romantic, exactly, but real, alive. I sent it to Elliot with a single caption, "The space between." He didn't reply right away, and somehow I appreciated that. His silence wasn't avoidance. It was consideration. When his reply finally came hours later, it was just one line. Sometimes what's left unsaid says the most. Mark came home earlier than expected that evening. He brought takeout, placed it on the counter, and opened a beer without asking if I wanted one. I watched him move around the kitchen like a man on autopilot, the same kitchen where we once danced barefoot in the middle of the night after our 10th anniversary dinner. "Everything okay?" he asked, almost out of habit. "Yes," I said, just thinking. "About?" I hesitated, not because I was hiding anything, but because the truth wasn't something I could offer casually while unpacking food containers. "About myself," I said finally, "and how long it's been since I felt like I knew who that was." He looked at me for the first time in days, really looked. "Claire, are you unhappy?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I think I've been quiet for too long, not just with you, with everyone, including myself." He sat down across from me, beer in hand. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then, "Is there someone else?" The question didn't sting. It didn't even startle me. "There's someone who reminded me how important it is to feel seen," I said carefully. "But this isn't about him. It's about me. About how I lost myself in everything I thought I was supposed to be." He nodded slowly, processing. The silence between us was uncomfortable, yes, but not destructive. In fact, it felt like the first honest silence we'd had in years. "I never wanted you to feel alone," he said finally. "I don't think you did. I think we both just drifted." The rest of the evening passed without drama. We ate. We cleaned up. We watched a show neither of us cared about. But under it all, there was a shift. Not a collapse, not an ending. Just a long overdue realization that our story might need a new chapter, together or apart. That night, as I lay in bed beside him, I didn't feel guilt. I felt clarity. Life, I realized, isn't always about grand decisions. Sometimes it's about the small moments that wake you up. The unexpected phone call. The message that lands a little too deep. The conversation that dares to ask, "Do you still recognize yourself?" A week later, I met Elliot again. Not in secret. Not in shame. But in calm, clear understanding. We walked through a quiet park, the breeze soft against our faces. We didn't touch. We didn't need to. At one point, he stopped beneath a maple tree and looked at me. "I want whatever part of you you're willing to share," he said. I smiled. "What I want to share right now is my truth, that I'm still figuring things out, that I'm not looking to escape my life, and learning how to live inside it again, fully." "That's enough," he said. "More than enough." And for the first time in years, I felt whole. Not because of him. Not because of Mark. But because I had found my way back to me. And no matter what came next, I knew I wouldn't lose sight of that again.